Welcome to You Are Intuitive, a refreshing series of conversations around developing and using intuition in the real world. I am your host, Dana Mahacek, and I'm so excited to be speaking with some of my favorite people in a real, honest, and open way about their personal experiences with intuition. Thank you so much for watching, listening, and tuning in. My guest today went from being a skeptical public relations and marketing pro to helping people find their special purpose and place during this revolutionary time on Earth using the amazing tool of archetypal astrology. Rebecca Farrar began studying astrology extensively more than 7 years ago, after completing brief forays as a TV reporter, speed dating hostess, spokesmodel, yoga instructor, and world traveler. She completed her MA thesis in 2013, which combines philology, consciousness studies, and enchantment with the stars. And today, she offers clients around the world with astrological guidance from a down-to-earth perspective. Her readings focus on the asteroids and attempt to increase her clients' experience of enchantment and participation with the cosmos. When she's not staring at her transits or your chart, Rebecca can be found wandering Ocean Beach, posting on Instagram, or force cuddling her kitty Freya. I'm so delighted to share our conversation with you, and I hope that you enjoy it. Thank you again. All right. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Dane. It's so great to see you.
I am supremely excited to chat with you today about intuition, and especially because I know we do have sort of a similar background in the fact that, we both have master's degrees, we both took this kind of academic pathway, and I'm just really excited to hear your perspective on intuition and how that's kind of played out for you and unfolded in your own life.
Yay. Yeah, and we're both also just kind of kooky, and I think that's also
a little bit
what makes it work so well.
You said it, not me. Just for the record.
We kind of have weird jobs, so we kind of play the part.
It's true. So to start off with, where did you come from as far as what's your history and what's your background before becoming an astrologer?
Yeah, so before I just looked at the stars all day, I actually worked in marketing, public relations, and business development for about 14 years. I was briefly a TV reporter. I had this very kind of classic, I guess, graduate from college, get a normal job, make it work type of thing. Mm-hmm. It's very much the comfort zone I think that we're programmed into.
And also, I saw in your bio that you had kind of claimed the fact that you were skeptical before, skeptical about intuition and about metaphysics. Has that changed at all, or do you still consider yourself skeptical when it comes to intuition?
Yeah, I don't know that I was skeptical about intuition, but I was very skeptical of astrology and a lot of metaphysical practices in general. I think with astrology in particular, the way that it was always presented to me was kind of in this very ungrounded, very new agey. It felt very disassociated to me from my human experience. It felt really generic. I think I still struggle with astrology when it's very much oh, let's just talk about your sun sign. Whereas the sun sign is the nice part of us, where the moon sign is a place where we're a little too human, a little too messy, a little too needy. So yeah, I definitely am not a skeptical. I think of a lot. I'm skeptical of hardcore, I think, new agey spirituality when it's very ungrounded and first the human experience.
Mm-hmm. And now kind of practicing astrology, I imagine that your intention and your aim is to kind of keep it real as much as possible and bring it landed a little bit more into the everyday, into the human experience, and just here on Earth, even though you're looking at the stars and at the constellations. Is that a fair assessment? Yeah.
Very, very, Dana. I think a lot of what I say is that I'm trying to really help people harmonize and commune with the earth and the ether, and really understand how those two interact, and they're interacting through you. And that's the magical part. So if you're only focusing on the ether, you're really not getting the whole picture of who you are.
Mm-hmm. And also speaking from experience, because I've had a number of readings done with you, and they are very grounded, and they are very like reassuringly tangible and practical, and at the same time inspiring and enchanting, like you were saying. Like, it's like, oh yeah, it gives me both aspects. So I really appreciate that about your work.
Thanks, love. That makes me feel like I'm actually doing what I'm trying to do. It's actually working. That's great.
Woo! Do you consider yourself intuitive, or do you call yourself an intuitive?
I didn't used to. It's funny because actually even in astrology, there are certain kind of astrological alignments that really kind of predispose someone to being more intuitive, or being in touch with that intuition differently. And I actually didn't notice even that I had that alignment until maybe a year ago. So it's strange that the awareness wasn't in myself, and then it also wasn't in the awareness of my chart either.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to be an astrologer. It never occurred to me that I was actually intuiting people's experience. We would have sessions where I would say, looks like there's probably some abuse in your mother's side, or I would go into these things, and to me they just felt so matter of fact. I didn't realize that they were actually not evolving from me. I was actually intuiting them. And whenever a session starts, I always get this like tingly feeling on the crown of my head. And I just thought I had a weird neurological disorder, I think, for a while.
That only happened before sessions?
Right. That only happened right as I was going to talk about the stars. And I remember seeing a friend of mine who is an intuitive, and she was just talking about my sessions and how much I'm really tapping into something and how intuitive I am. And until that moment, like, it hadn't even occurred to me that what was happening was intuition. And I feel silly talking about it now, but it just I didn't even think about that was a possibility,
But then it's true, because I find the label or the identity of, like, it seems that there's a perception that you can be intuitive or you can be unintuitive, and like the gap between someone who's just like regular intuitive and someone who is like professionally and officially unintuitive, there's kind of a problem with that, or like I don't feel very comfortable with that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that I love this conversation because it's so much about like, what is the privilege of intuition, right? Like, who gets to own intuition? And I mentioned before how I have this real struggle with the word download, because it does like really imply to me that somehow you're privy to information that someone else is not privy to. And to me, that's actually an illusion. Whenever I hear kind of a self-righteous, like, well, I downloaded this and this is what's happening, it always kind of is a red flag for me around like, well, you can trust everyone to have their own tuition. And this is a bit of a sidetrack, but I want to mention it, that I was recently in Iceland, the country where majority of people believe in elves and hidden people and things they can't see. And I was at this elf school, because that's what I find when I'm in Iceland. I'm like, okay, I'll go to the waterfalls and elf school.
And elf school. I need to go there.
Oh my God, everyone needs to go there. This man is amazing. He's like a giant Santa Claus elf. But he said something interesting about how he was like, well, I believe only 1 to 3% of people are intuitive, and they're usually women or people who identify as bisexual or gay. And it was interesting to me that he had this idea of like who could be intuitive. They had to be balanced in their sexuality or somehow in their gender. They had to be more feminine. And it was a small percentage of people who had access. right? And
which I
that's
don't believe
crazy
at
to
all.
me.
Yeah.
Me neither. I'm like, everyone I think is so intuitive. It's just a matter if you're willing to actually consciously relate to it or not. And so that was something that struck to me, that even this person who had this deep mystical connection to all these beings wanted to somehow keep it this club of like, I can see these beings and not everyone can see them. So I'm somehow more special, maybe in some way, like that
Yeah.
wounding of like wanting to feel special, then showing up as this power, the godlike narcissistic power that I won't go into it, but I like got really like political or weird there, and I didn't know how to finish it. So I was just like that thing that sometimes people do when they don't feel like they're good enough, where we have to find something to make us special.
Yes. Yeah. And I even actually, I noticed that in myself as well. And I think part of the reason why I'm even hosting these conversations and creating this series is to kind of like redress that and like make amends for like that time when I was mystical as fuck, right? And was just like feeling, and it's not to say that like my intuition isn't real or whatever, but I felt like I was just like on this almost like a rocket ship of cosmicness, and it was like downloads and channels, and like I am an intuitive, and I'm like an intuitive priestess, and I'm like so amazing. And then all of a sudden I was like, actually that doesn't feel right to me, that doesn't feel good to me. And it also was completely like bypassing the fact that I also believe everyone is intuitive. And those two things didn't add up to be, on one hand, so mystical and so profound and going so deep, but then at the same time being like, actually I want this to be inclusive. I want this to be accessible, because it is, right? I just like want to make a pivot on my own track here and just bring it right back down to earth.
Oh, I love that, Dana. And I think there is a part of me that does have to even watch in myself, right? The like narcissistic desire to somehow feel special, and how does that translate into my work versus empowering my clients that like, you have access to all the information I'm telling you. You know, like I am not this special person who can give you advice and tell you what to do. So I try not to ever answer questions when people are like, can you tell me where to move? Can you tell me what to do? Because I think you always want to push people back to their own intuition and their own authority. And I think that is where intuition gets dangerous, is when you're trying to use your own intuition to be an authority for someone else.
Exactly. And the way you put that is just, it's, well, I was going to say smack on, but it's bang on. It's bang on.
But smack on just feels a little bit more.
I was like, but that's kind of sounds like violent about that. But it is true. Like, using your own intuition to be an authority for somebody else is when the line gets crossed. And it can be a challenge in a profession like your profession or in my profession, where people are paying you to come get insights. You know, like, how do you navigate that that terrain where you're like, this is how you earn a living, you know, this is what you do, but you're also not wanting to cross the line of like, this is what I'm telling you, and like, I have this power and I have this authority. How do you navigate that in your own business?
Oh, yeah. You know, sorry, my doorbell is terrible. I just have to buzz in a package while I'm moving. This is so awkward. I was not expecting delivery.
It's all good.
I actually am pretty sure it's a book on human sexuality or something like that. So it's probably kind of important. So, you know, I think that balance for me comes in looking at myself. Like, I've definitely been the type of person who, when I didn't think I had intuition, wanted someone to give me an answer about what to do. You know, I I was kind of classic in my 20s spiritual bypasser. I mean, classic. Like, I would get uncomfortable when anyone talked about emotions. I was in like a Buddhist sangha. I was a yoga teacher. I lived in an ashram. I was like so identified with being this like kind of spiritually righteous person. And then in return, I would follow these like gurus or follow usually men, and just keep kind of not being able to find myself. So I'm always very suspicious of any dynamic where someone claims to be an authority. Even in places where I am technically the authority, I do my best to always push back with them of like, okay, does that resonate for you? Like, what feels true to you as I'm saying that? And when people want me to tell them what to do, I will name it. It feels like you want me to tell you what to do, but I really want you to feel for yourself. Here's all the options. Here's all the information I can provide you. And then you choose from your own space.
And with my own practice too, like I discontinued readings and sessions probably about 5 or 6 months ago now. But, and that was only like part of the reason. Like, I didn't want to be intuitive for people anymore. I wanted to be intuitive with people. And so that was part of the reason. But I was noticing a lot of my, like the final sessions that I was doing, it would, like, even if they would come and ask a question, I'd be like, here's how you can tap into that information for yourself, right? Like, totally not skirting around that, but like, I would rather teach you tools to help you find that for yourself than just be like, I am bestowing an answer upon you.
Yeah, and I think you're also touching on this interesting dynamic of, as more and more people are really claiming their authority and really claiming their wisdom in this age of Aquarius, I think it also really behooves us to really check in with people still around when we're just like throwing at them information versus when we're actually coming from a place of like wanting to share ourselves.
Yes.
That's something I also struggle a lot with, is like, how do I have a voice of authority that like doesn't sound like I'm trying to be your teacher or your authority? More of just like me speaking from my own messiness and hoping that that resonates with you. And I always try, even when I'm posting about astrology things, to really not be like, oh, and this is the thing that this happens and this is how it's going to be. And instead say, okay, here's 7 billion ways that this might show up for you.
Yeah.
What way feels like is with you the most, or something like that.
Yeah.
That instead of that dictative.
Yeah, this is happening, which means this.
Right.
And if you don't experience this during an eclipse,
you're not intuitive. You're not tapped in.
Something is wrong with you. Exactly. You had mentioned, I just want to circle back to when you're looking at a chart and you would say something about there might be some abuse on the mom's side or something like that. Is that something that you could actually see in a chart, or is that something that was intuitively coming up for you without you realizing it? Like, is there an asteroid or a planet that it's like, oh, abuse on the mom's side?
Totally. There is. Well, I think the beautiful part of astrology to me is it's a beautiful combination of intuition and pattern recognition, right? And so it's this combo where you're really using both sides of the brain, where you're using, and that's where I think I don't get so kind of off into the ethers, is because I'm also balancing it with like, where have I seen this before on Earth? Where have I seen this before with other people? And for me, there are definitely combinations where, yes, I look at that and my first thought is like, I wonder if this pattern is what's real for them. But archetypes and planets are what are called multivalent. And this is where I'll try not to be lectury, but my teacher, Richard Tarnas, he studies what's called archetypal astrology, and that's the lineage that it's very academic in astrology, and I really appreciate it. And what we talk a lot about is that every planet and every sign has this like huge spectrum of experience. So at any moment, we're like picking between one of those. And so it just so happens I 99% of the time pick the one thing that person is actually experiencing.
Yeah. But it could be also too, like, again, going back to my experience having readings from you, like you said, 99% of the time, I'm like, yes, this is my experience. And then there's a few times where I'm like, not quite. And then you're like, there's a spectrum. How does this one resonate for you? Or how does this one land with you? And then it's like, oh yeah, that feels more aligned for me. That feels more relevant to my personal experience, compared to that one other shade of gray that was picked out before.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, because I think sometimes those dissonances do happen when I'm in a session, and I always have to sit with, okay, well then when it's not resonating, it's probably because I'm then projecting my own experience of that combination versus tapping into their experience, and going back and forth between that.
And how do you personally tap into a person's experience? Like, what does that look like in this tangible, grounded, practical way? How are you tapping into somebody?
Yeah, so when I'm tapping in, I may usually always try to do, some sort of prayer just to kind of affirm that for both of us, that this is in our highest good, and so that there's a relationship being established right away, and it's not just based on my relationship to something.
Yeah.
I think the other way is, again, just like that kind of checking in as much as I can, over and over again. Like, is this feel like you or not? Does this feel like you or not?
And checking in verbally. So like how you tune into people is really like sitting on in front of them, or sitting, over Zoom or Skype or whatever, and actually verbally asking them and checking in.
Yeah, I love that you even named that, because that hasn't been my awareness before, but for me, this is how we gauge reality on some level, right? And that's how we gauge relationality. And so if someone's, it's a little loud. Is that
it's
me?
An excavator beside. Yeah, so sorry.
No, that's fine.
I'm trying to pretend it's not there.
No, it's totally fine. I think a huge piece of it is like, relationship is what creates intimacy. Communication is what creates intimacy. So tapping in does have a lot to do with communication, because you're creating intimacy on a spiritual level. So I have to use words in some ways to like make that real, I think.
And it's different too, because when I was, sorry about this noise.
It's okay. It sounds like a UFO.
It probably is.
It probably is right now.
With the sessions that I had been doing before, they were all pre-recorded audios. So I wasn't, checking in with people in that time to be like, how is this landing with you? How is this feeling for you? My kind of tuning into people was very much this energetic sensation of almost like if I could feel in my body whether they were energetically expanding or contracting in relation to what I was saying. And so I would record a session and then afterwards be like in an email, let me know how that landed for you, or if there's any questions or anything that came up. But during the actual doing of the reading, the practice of being intuitive for me was this, it was an energetic resonance rather than a straightforward asking a question and like seeing how it's landing with somebody. So that's, it's always nice to be reminded that I'm like, you can just ask someone? That's so cool.
Well, I love that too, Dana, because I've been thinking about doing more kind of shorter sessions that are just pre-recorded to make things a little more accessible. And that was already what I was running into, was I would leave this message as I was finishing, like, please let me know if this lands, what if this lands. But you're right, if I could tap in and use more of that contraction experience, that would be a great way to gauge.
And that for me was it was practice. Like, definitely the first reading I ever did was not just like on an audio pre-recorded. It took practice of like interactive practice with people before I could kind of develop that trust in myself, that what I was feeling energetically within me and also within them was real, that I wasn't just making that up. But that was like, those muscles were developed in a really embodied, interactive way, just step by step. Because I'm sure if I would have just done that from the beginning, I would have been like, I am pulling this out of my ass. Like, I don't know what I'm talking about, or just feeling kind of crazy about it. But I had done enough interactive, over Skype sessions, where I could trust that whatever I was feeling was resonant. And also, like you were saying, setting that intention that it's for the highest good of everyone.
Well, I actually kind of have a question for you.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you experience times when you're working with a client where actually you don't feel your intuition as much. Because there's something I've kind of navigated in sessions where with some people, I feel like it doesn't turn on.
Your intuition?
Yeah. It's like there's like some sort of dissonance in our field. And I can't actually get information. And I've had sessions like that. And usually I walk away thinking, oh, they actually weren't supposed to be my client. Yeah. So I'd be curious if you had experiences like that too, where like it doesn't turn on or something.
I've had experiences with people approaching me to get a reading where I feel like it's not going to turn on. And in that case, I'm like, I'll just make a recommendation for somebody else that they can speak with. And sometimes I would like actually explain just the disconnect, but usually it'd be like, oh, my schedule's full, right? Like here's somebody else that you can go see instead. But what I did notice sometimes in a session, it felt like my intuition wasn't turning on as much, that it was like a low volume reading. And for me, I had a lot of inner turmoil about that, because I was like, I'd want to go so much deeper and be like more specific, or like worried that I wasn't connecting with that person as strongly or as deeply as I knew I've been able to connect with other people. But then what's interesting is that the feedback afterwards was like, that was exactly what they needed. That like, had my intuition been on full gas, it might not have landed as well. Like it might have been too much, or like overwhelming, or just put up a wall to it. And even though I was feeling like, oh, this isn't enough, for the person who was receiving that reading, it was like exactly the level of spice that they needed.
Oh, that's awesome, Dana.
Yeah,
that's reassuring.
And it could very well be the same for you. Like, just because you're feeling like, I'm not getting anything, it could actually be whatever you want to call it, spirit, universe, God, source, whatever. It could actually be tailored tweaking it and like making these subtle adjustments and calibrations, so that, because they've come to you for a reason. And it could just be you intuitively and very subconsciously adjusting your own delivery so that it can be received in the best way possible by that person.
Yeah, it's like I'm actually adjusting my volume for them in some way. Yeah, I like that explanation a lot. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You are welcome. Can you tell me more about the crown tingling?
Yeah,
I'm really curious about that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. I really have thought for a long time that I have a neurological disorder, because there are certain times where this part of my brain just tingles so much that I'm worried that actually maybe there's not blood going there, or it's like dying, or I'm getting like Alzheimer's, or I don't know, like hypochondriac style. I don't know what that is. But I've noticed when it also happens when someone else is being intuitive. And that was, I think, where I started to get it, is that I would begin a session and I would begin to set the intention of like, okay, now this is about this. And that intention was set. And then I would just feel the top, especially like literally right on the crown, right in the back of my head, just like start to tingle and like kind of relax me and feel kind of trance-like. And then I would notice that would also happen around certain people. And it was usually people who they were in a moment of just like giving some sort of information that I needed to hear, or that they were in a group that they were bringing information to.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a really amazing reminder of like, oh, there's literally just a part of my body that's like responding and opening in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I just assumed that either happened to everyone. One, it either happened to everyone, or there was something wrong with me and I had a disease.
Yeah, a sickness.
A sickness.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's, especially with the brain, it's easy to jump to conclusions with brain things.
Yeah, I'm like, it's brain cancer. Like something's, just like my brain isn't functioning well. There's a part of it that goes numb. Something is wrong, right? But actually it's like that numbness and somehow is a way of something resting to hear, I think.
Yeah.
What also just came to me that I feel like I want to mention is that, Mercury retrograde to me is an interesting phase of when I think people become more intuitive. My theory is that during Mercury retrograde, the planet that makes us super analytical is slowing down and going in a way it's not used to going. I mean, our perception is it's moving backwards, not actually moving backwards. But during this time, a lot of people, I think, get freaked out about like, oh, things are going to collapse. But my expression is always like, this is a time of more intuition because the part of you to analyze is like resting in some way so that the other part of you can maybe hear more.
That's actually really intriguing to have that perspective. And even when I was starting to schedule these talks, I had no idea that they're all in Mercury retrograde. Like I'm doing all the interviews, but I'm doing all the interviews, and part of me was like, oh no, like technology breakdowns and communication errors and all of that. But I actually really appreciate this other perspective, that it's enhancing intuition and it's allowing people to kind of process data or energy in ways that aren't necessarily as analytical or mind driven as we might be used to.
Yeah, I mean, I even notice it in myself that it's more for me about like slowing down and being more diligent because my intuition feels stronger. I'm like, I have to focus more on things to get them done. Yeah, it's a weird phase. I don't like when people I feel like I have to defend Mercury, like retrograde.
4 times a year.
Right, like Mercury retrograde, I think it's, depending on the year, it depends on how many times it goes retrograde, but I'm always kind of like, you're not the enemy here, it's like people thinking they can't rely on the part of them that isn't analytical feels like what's wrong. And there is this pattern I noticed that, majority of incredible authors actually have Mercury in retrograde when they're born. To me, it tells me that they're like somehow channeling information differently, that makes them able to use their imagination in a different way instead of being super analytical with their mind all the time. So yeah, I think that's an interesting thing, that a lot of famous writers and the best fiction writers have Mercury in retrograde when they're born.
That's really interesting. I don't think you brought that up with my chart, so
probably not. I mean,
probably
Dana,
didn't have Mercury in retrograde.
I'm like always wanting to talk about your chart, but I probably have missed some things in your chart.
But it probably wasn't in retrograde when I was born.
I don't know. I'd have to look.
Yeah. Is intuition something now that you can kind of consciously tap into, or is it still something that kind of just happens before a session? Or like, can you willfully turn on your crown numbness at certain times? Or like, how do you tap into your intuition intentionally now? Or can you, or do you?
Yeah, I love that you asked that, because I think that's kind of the journey I'm on right now. Is it's like only maybe a year into realizing I'm intuitive. And that they're probably not dying of a brain neurological disorder. So I think that what I really think about now is that I find, first of all, when I close my eyes is usually because I'm wanting to reassess where my mind is. I realize I do that a lot when I'm like, oh, I'm being super analytical, close my eyes, readjust something somehow. I definitely do that. But I think consciously what I'm realizing is that because I'm such a busybody, and all of us are, we're not having the space for intuition as much. So I get so intuitive when I'm in the shower, when I'm on a walk. And I really work at trying to be off electronics around 9. And usually I just like get so much information the second I'm not focusing on something external. You know, it's like the internal focus is what just like, and it's so common sense. I think anyone who talks about intuition probably has a similar experience, right?
And it is like, it makes so much sense. And yet the type of world that we live in, it's so externally focused sometimes, and we are all busy, and we all have things to do and courses to take and this to achieve and accomplish. And sometimes it just feels like cultivating that stillness or that silence or just that like being offline is the last on the priority list, if it's even on the priority list, even though it's kind of the simplest thing to do. It's usually seems to be the last thing that we do if we have time for it.
If we have time.
Yeah.
Well, it's so true. And I've also been studying like what are the ways where the intuition comes through like on purpose. And I have found that when I'm writing by hand, like if I'm having a hard time working through something and I'm like, I know I want to do this type of offering, or I know I want to take this route with my business, and like my mind can't figure it out, it's not working, I'll just start like writing out and like sketching things in paper. And then it just is so much easier for me to access.
When you have like the pen to the paper. Yeah, I have a writing practice as well that I haven't been doing it as much lately, but I know some people say like write in your non-dominant hand if you want to tap into that. But for me, I'm such a perfectionist with that. And I'm like, I don't like the way that my writing looks with my non-dominant hand. So I'm not going to do that, right? Like it would just frustrate me more than allow me to like tap into that zone. I would just be like, no, that's not the way I'm going in. But the writing practice for sure also helps me. Do you do any sort of like do you pull cards, or do you use crystals, or are you like pretty removed from the typical new age metaphysical realm?
I definitely pull cards. I don't pull tarot cards. I pull like an elemental or earth deck type of cards. Because I do feel like I spend so much time in the ethers that I want to like almost get out of the purely archetypal realm of tarot. I also, so I have a diviner that I see actually, and I think he's probably the one that I notice the most of, noticing his trance and when he's opening up, and then using that a lot for my own opening as well.
Yeah, having
like being
that
in a field of him.
And then just being able to like see it and feel it and witness it. It kind of gives not a model to like base your own thing off of, but it's just it's a piece of information that you can be like, that's interesting.
Yeah. And it's funny, Danny, because I keep like wanting a divination that's like one that is mine to use, and I haven't really found it yet. Like I was using, pendulums, and I was using tea leaves, and then I was like trying to get into bird patterns, and then I was into like geomancy, and then I was into salt divination. Like I was really trying to find this divination tool, and a part of me thinks that I just maybe don't really have one because I'm trying to learn how to just navigate it in myself. I don't know, but I am still. So if you think of any weird ones that your intuition, your intuition's like, hey, maybe Rebecca would enjoy this tool.
Yeah,
I'm totally
analyzing carbonated bubble patterns. But it is, I think that especially when you're first starting out, or when you're recognizing yourself as intuitive, there's this part that wants to harness that and to like find a way to maximize that for yourself. And I would say it's natural, the first inclination to be like, okay, what's the tool that I can use, or what's the book that I can read, or what's the like course or formula that I could take into myself to maximize that or to harness that. And then it's kind of like a catch-22, because it's like, well, actually the way to harness it is to go into yourself, right? And to not need the tools, or to, because I think the tools can very, very easily become crutches.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is true. I think maybe that is maybe a part of my fear, is that I'll like overuse it. But I have, gotten feedback even when I see my own diviner, where there is some tool that would really help balance the energies of talking about the stars with something really tangible.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that will, I was also doing palmistry, trying to navigate, like getting really down to earth with your hand. But yeah, that hope not using it as a crutch, but both I think would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. And can you speak just a little bit about, oh, I just see this thing. My internet connection is unstable.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Can you speak a little bit to studying with someone? Like, I know that you have a teacher for the archetypal astrology. How important do you feel it is for people who are becoming intuitive, or like developing and honing their intuitive skills? How important do you think it is to have a teacher?
I think there was a time when I was super into teachers, and now I'm not really. Like, I would describe him that he was my teacher for a phase. Like, I studied with him in grad school. He was my
Mm-hmm.
teacher for 3 years. I took a lot of classes with him, and I still read his work and go to his lectures, but I definitely wouldn't consider him, like, I'm in the lineage that he created,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know that I would identify a lot with, like, he's the person I get my information from.
Yeah.
I do think, though, anytime you're studying an esoteric practice, I think anytime you can work with someone in the beginning is so great,
Mm-hmm.
to like learn from them, and then, really learn from yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's been my experience too, where I felt I didn't need, but I felt that I needed to work with someone at the beginning to just kind of like give me a container or a framework within which I could work. But then, we had, I think, 3, maybe 4 sessions together. And then she was just like pushed me out of the nest and was like, okay, that's the end. Like, it's your turn now, and evolve in your own way. So I think both are beneficial. Having the teacher is beneficial, but also having the time when you're no longer, dependent on that teacher or those teachings to fulfill you or to complete you.
Yeah, well, and to the idea that a huge piece, I think, of being an intuitive or being just a healer in general is still learning, even if you don't have a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the piece where I studied with him for a long time, but I'm definitely never stopping learning. I'm always reading astrology books. I'm always going to lectures. I still have memberships in different organizations, so I can learn and tap into learning.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not like putting one person as my authority.
Yes.
Consistently,
Definitely. I think that's a very well-balanced approach, Rebecca.
Why, thank you, Dana. That feels very affirming.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. And I really, really appreciate the groundedness of your perspective, and I think you're unique in the fact that you are in a very intuitive, metaphysical field, new agey field, but yet you're not this new agey, really woo-woo person. And I find that really, really refreshing. So thank you for just adding your voice to this conversation and series.
Oh, thank you, Dana. I feel so honored to be asked and for seeing that in me, because that feels really good.
Yeah. And if people wanted to learn more about your work, or if they wanted to book a session with you, where's the best place to connect with you online?
So my website, my alias is Wild Witch of the West, and my website is wildwitch.west. So just the 3 words, wildwitchwest.com.
Perfect. And I'll put the link to that below the video, and I'll also put your Instagram, because you're awesome to follow on Instagram too.
Oh, thanks, love. You are too, obviously.
Obviously. Just a little pitch in there. I didn't pay her to say that, don't worry. So thank you again, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Dana. You too. Good to see you.
Nice to see you too. Bye.
Bye.